There's been this discourse around modern R&B for a long time, like the past 10 years at least, and that's that R&B is dead. This has always annoyed me as an R&B enjoyer who tries to be positive about things, because there's no way I could say that modern R&B sucks. But obviously old school R&B is legendary and revered, rightly so. I love both eras and just wanted to rant about this, so here we are. A lot of things have changed since that golden age of 90s R&B, and it definitely was rough for a long time, let's not get that twisted. But I feel like we might be heading into a new golden age as R&B has been steadily rising for the last few years at least. I think it's important for us to define R&B before we have this discussion though. I've talked about my thoughts on genres and how restrictive and reductive they can be, and the reality is R&B has been diffused and diluted into so many areas of music nowadays that what we're really talking about and missing is traditional R&B. I'm talking about Boyz II Men, Jodeci, Brandy, SWV, Aaliyah, D'Angelo, Keith Sweat, Joe, Bobby Brown. The R&B stars of today are a lot harder to pin down as R&B artists because R&B today is just so different. We have guys like Summer Walker, LMA, Kehlani, and Leon Thomas, for example. But then we also have guys like Chris Brown, Drake, SZA, and Brent Faiyaz. It's harder to convince somebody that they all exist in the same realm. And this goes to my point about genres because it's so hard to say when it can change from song to song as easily as it does from album to album with artists today. Maybe that means that people take less pride in being R&B artists, or refuse to be boxed in as one thing, or want to do more. And you can feel however you want to about that, but Leon Thomas and Kehlani seem to be leading the way in this R&B resurgence after their incredible last year. Essentially sweeping the R&B side of the Grammys, that's a pretty good barometer to say that they're at the top of the game. And I think there's a very intentional effort from both of them to reinstate that 90s feel and sound. I mean, just look at some of Kehlani's recent music videos. She's pulling out all of the cliches. I feel like they're not only paying homage to the genre and sound that they love and grew up on, but it's clearly an inspiration that they're pulling from, and more importantly, it's resonating with people because we miss it and love it. But that's not always a good thing. I think we have an obsession with the past, and it exists in so many places. Like with the NBA or sports, there's a glorification, element of nostalgia, and an immortalization of the past. It's placed on a pedestal that can never be topped. And there will always be arguments why that's the case, although it's never possible to compare these things one-to-one because we're dealing with hypotheticals, and honestly just different worlds. So to people who grew up with this music, it's only natural, like all things we're nostalgic about, to love it that little bit more. Now we could get into the psychology of why, but it's basically tying memories to this vehicle of the past, and that's something that makes music so special. Music has this profound power that lets us associate memories with these songs and sounds. I have albums that bring me right back to exactly what I was doing at the time, and I'm sure you have a ton of memories tied to music too. 90s R&B is no different for people who grew up loving it. But even for me, as somebody who didn't grow up in the 90s, there's definitely merit to its greatness rather than it being entirely nostalgic bias. And placing exactly why is tough, but we'll figure that out in a moment. But the problem comes when this bias turns into hater behavior or unfair comparisons. Because part of nostalgia is tied to longing for days we won't get back. 90s R&B is a product of the 90s. It was a specific time and feeling that could only really be made then and there. Just like the music from the 2000s, the 2010s, and what we love now. Or again, with the NBA and old heads saying that modern players wouldn't have made it back in the day because it was more physical. What are we talking about really? Are we time traveling and dropping them in the world as they are today? Or are they growing up in that time and being a product of their environment? Because in that case, they'd play the game like everybody else. Or if they were dropped in that time, they'd revolutionize the sport. But to some people, Michael Jordan and the era they grew up on will never be topped, and that's that. End of story. But the same goes for music. People make what they know and what surrounds them. Really, no genre of music's the same from 25 years ago to today. Everything has changed. Or evolved. I think R&B being different hurts because it was so special. It was a leading genre at that time, and now it feels like a fallen giant in comparison. To some people. Then there's also the question of pop. What is that? When do we decide what breaches into popular music? I would argue that pop music has a mainstream sound that's meant for the radio. And I think R&B has always prided itself on its soul and blues roots. And where I can get behind R&B dying is the death of soul, because that to me is the biggest loss between these two eras. I realize that what I love most about 90s R&B is the raw, unfiltered passion of it. The vocals that sound so human and impossible at the same time that it gives you goosebumps. And I think there's two reasons why we lost that for a while. Firstly, speaking about different worlds, love and relationships are so crucial to the human experience and obviously huge parts of R&B. And without knowing what it was like in the 90s, it seems so different today. Modern day relationships, the premise of so many songs, are different, and people can only write and make what they know. And as an audience, for whatever reason, heartbreak sells way more than true love. Romantic love songs have just fallen out of favour. And you hear so many people talk about love and romance back in the day and how those songs soundtracked what it should be. Today's R&B breeds toxicity, shallow relationships, and detachment more than anything. But again, this is a product of our time. If the world is different from the 90s, how could you expect somebody to make something similar? And with that comes a change in production to generally a darker sound that adds to the befitting emotion of the track. And I am generalizing throughout this whole video, obviously. Not every song fits into what I'm saying. But those old school songs in comparison are much warmer and upbeat. Again, this is a difference in time and era, as a lot of music production today is electronically produced, with the loss of real instruments being another case of the loss of soul in the genre that we can hear and place. But a change in the content of songs doesn't necessarily mean that the soul of it is gone. Sad or toxic songs can still be even more emotional and cathartic. But it's a factor, and combined with the second change paints a clearer picture. And that's the rise of autotune. Since Cher did it in '98, and obviously the way T-Pain pushed it in the mid to late 2000s completely changed the game. And I love T-Pain, and I love autotune. This is not a condemnation, but me explaining why it hits different. There's never been more access to making music. People don't need the natural and often most important talent of singing like they used to. Vocals and the studied practice of them was a defining pillar of R&B that's optional in today's industry. Not that our stars can't sing, but it was a prerequisite back in the day. And altered, synthesized voices in this soul-led genre is always going to taint its rawness. And let's not even start with AI artists. But I have two feelings toward autotune today. I think you can still appreciate music and a song for what it is even with it. I'm not one of those purists who think it's an abomination, but rather not using it being a bonus or deserving extra credit. And I think it allows so many great songs to exist and so many great artists who get to share their unique stories. That's a huge addition to today's music scene compared to back then. But on the other hand, like I've said, it's something that is or was missing that was previously so immediately and powerfully felt on old school records by singers lauded as vocalists, who had this sort of superpower compared to the rest of us. And so, despite there being more access to music today, a lot more is needed for artists and their art to stick and for it to resonate in the same way. But there's still a lot I love about modern R&B. I think the ease of access to it has allowed a wider scope of favourite artists, genres, and styles that people can gravitate to. It isn't as top-heavy in that respect, at least in theory. You and I could have a completely different list of our top 10 favourites, and you might listen to some artists that I've never heard of, and that's cool. I love that, and the possibility of music existing that uniquely suits us and how we feel or what we like is special. I think R&B has ultimately permeated and influenced so many other genres that it can still take pride in too, from indie rock to pop and hip-hop. Unfortunately, this has led to a loss of R&B focus acts, but so many of the best artists in the world today can be seen as R&B adjacent. From The Weeknd to Bruno Mars to Drake, SZA, the list goes on. I think modern R&B is different but great in its own right, and I don't think old school R&B needs to be replaced or have its torch carried. It will always exist, and it being irreplaceable is what makes it special. As much as we might be influenced by it today, it will never be the same, and that's okay. R&B can still be great and loved without this need for comparison or yearning for what's gone. But another thing I love about the 90s and the early 2000s era is how R&B was proudly R&B. It had no desire to be pop music, but it was needed and loved for what it was, and was massive by merit. And I think that growing desire of wanting to be more later on led to it losing its way in the later half of the 2000s. But as far as the golden era goes, and when we speak about impact, being referenced, missed, and loved 30 years later says a lot. Another thought I had was everything being generational, meaning that R&B was an evolution that came from the emergent and dominant era of 70s and 80s soul music and disco. Our favourite artists and producers who led the way for R&B grew up on that music and were inspired by it. And I think this history repeats itself. When we look at when R&B changed, we have to look at the mid-2000s through to the early 2010s. It was a case of experimentation and evolution, with R&B fusing with hip-hop and pop. I think it could even trace back to Timbaland and Missy Elliott's impact with Aaliyah's music and how she inspired her peers, with their futuristic stuttering synth-based sound being so foreign. R&B got faster with synths and electronic sounds morphing its sound, and again making it lose some of its soul as it blurred the lines with other genres. I don't think this had much of an impact on the sound and feel of R&B, but the lack of groups is undeniable today, and something that was a bit of a trope of various genres in the 90s. Why did that change? I think that will take us down the business side of music, and that's boring and sad, because I think that's all due to maximizing profit from a label's perspective and getting the most money and fame from an artist's perspective. But I did make the lofty claim that R&B is primed for its next golden generation. And look, that might be a stretch, but I'm excited. I think modern R&B continues to get better. We have new artists entering the scene like Jaden, who seems so clearly inspired by Chris Brown, it's kind of surreal to see. And again, we can look at how our established artists are still innovating, like Kehlani with Folded. And I'm using that song to project a lot here. She's leading this R&B resurgence by having a viral song that promotes and brings back that old school sound. And on top of this, she's clearly paying homage to the greats of R&B by having a lot of them feature and remix the song. It's just dope to see. And that's the thing too, in terms of that generational evolution and inspiration, the artists of today are children of the 90s and 2000s who grew up on that legendary era of music. The exact same way Chris Brown looked at Michael Jackson. And you look at an artist like Kehlani or Leon Thomas, and they seem eager to bring it back to the forefront and pull from that old, comfortable, and beloved sound. And to this point, I think we're going to see a lot more people sample and interpolate those 90s and 2000s R&B classics that have become nostalgic. Because from a business perspective, it's clear that it works. With people clamoring for that golden age for so long, it's no surprise that when it is lovingly used, it resonates with people. So I think there's an intent right now to bring that era back. I even look at Kali Uchis and her pulling from 60s and 70s big band, jazz, and cinematic sounds in her last album. We're in a nostalgic age, sometimes for the worse, but when we're able to appreciate the present too, it makes for great music and the positivity we're missing at times. There's room for it all. That 90s music is not coming back, but will always be there. But I think we're moving away from the weight of comparison to where it can now be a motivating inspiration to make our version of it. It's funny because I started writing this video idea in a rant about modern R&B slander and how much I hated that, and I feel and hope it turned into a love letter to both eras. Thanks for watching, have a great day or night, and listen to some R&B.